Hello, and welcome to the Real Estate Regroup Show. I am your host, LJ Walker, a real estate investor presenting information that will shift your thinking on how you can own a home or invest in one. Today's show, I will be speaking about exit strategies for real estate investors. As you know, whenever you get into any deal, you should have an exit strategy in case something goes wrong. That exit strategy can be and should be one that you set before you even get into the deal, as far as when you sign the offering paper, after you sign the offering, after you close, and after, let's say, 1 to 3 years of owning that property, and then maybe even think about further in the future, 5 to 10 years, what your exit strategy should be. And you should definitely have one when you are buying with another person. So let's think about certain things certain strategy triggers, if you will, that will help you along the way. 1, if you get ripped off by the realtor, the property manager, the contractor, you need to think of how it is that you are either going to end that relationship. You should end it as quickly as possible, of course. But once you end it, you should think of, well, what are you going to do next? Are you going to sell the property? Are you going to keep the property? If you are going to keep the property, what are you going to do about finances? You may want to speak with your accountant and your lawyer ahead of time instead of waiting at the end to find out what their thoughts and their suggestions are as far as what you need to do in case something like that happens to you. As you know, it happened to me, which is why I wrote the book, The Perils of Real Estate Scam Alert. The next thing you need to think of as far as exit strategies is concerned is if you have a partner that you are doing the deal with. What if you don't get along? You see, some people are your friends, but just because they're your friends, that doesn't mean you should do business with them. You may find that even though you share the same goals and ambitions, the way in which you want to arrive at that area or your work ethics may be in conflict. So you may want to rethink about, okay, what will happen if me and John or Jill run into a disagreement? How are we going to handle it? Are we going to get a mediator, or are we going to dissolve the partnership? And if we dissolve it, are we going to split 50-50? How is this going to be done? And that should be done before you even have an argument, before there's a disagreement. It's best to do that ahead of time, because a lot of times when you wait until you're angry, sometimes when you're angry and you're flustered, you don't think things through properly, and things boil over and get out of hand. You might want to have it to where, okay, we don't work together, but we can still be friends. And the same thing goes with family. I mean, family, unfortunately, you're gonna be, you may stop speaking to each other, but the blood still flows through the two of you, so you will always be family. But the relationship that you have, it may cause an issue, especially if, when it comes to family gatherings like Christmas and Thanksgiving and what have you. So you want to think about those things beforehand. Even though you laugh, tee-hee, and you get along now, once you do business, that's a different story altogether. The other issue that you may want to think about is, let's say, the property that you buy, you've already closed on it, and you bought it because you wanted to be near a hospital. But because of state funding, that hospital closes. And now all of the doctors and the nurses and all of the other medical professionals in that hospital, they're no longer in that neighborhood. They've moved to another hospital in another area. Do you want to keep that home, or do you want to sell that home now that the main employer has left the area? Or it could be not just the employers filing for bankruptcy, but like if any major employers decide that they are going to move out of town. The next thing is this. Sometimes you buy a house, or even a co-op or condo for that matter, and you find that the HOA is like the Hitler Gestapo. They get all up in your business. They may not like you. They may not like the person that you rent your property to. And they will do whatever they can to get rid of you. You might want to think, okay, this is what we're going to do in case the HOA is causing us too much grievance. Because some people prefer peace of mind over a piece of check, if you will. Sometimes you may see a better deal. And if you see a better deal and you're holding on to something that it might be profitable, but it's not making you as much money as you hoped, or as much money as this other deal that you're looking at, you may decide you want to sell this other property and move on to another property. Just like the HOA, you may also run into a troublesome tenant association. Maybe if you bought a building and it has multiple tenants in it, the tenant association may be making certain demands that you deem unreasonable. For example, they want a whole lot done to the property, and most of the work that they want done on the property is work that their children caused, as far as them ripping up the place, and then they want you to lower the rent. You may decide that this is not worth the headache, and you're going to sell your property to get rid of that. Or if there's another way, you may consider that other way as far as how you're going to deal with the issue at hand. Weather changes may be an issue for you. I know of a person who bought a property in an area that never flooded, and then all of a sudden they had an enormous flood in that particular city. The whole entire city was, I believe, 3 feet deep in water. So he didn't have flood insurance. The insurance that he had did not want to cover it. So it was time for him to make a decision. And it was just so much because like all the tenants decided to sue him and what have you. Many tenants, they don't realize that the landlord's insurance, even if he did have flood insurance, it would only cover the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Landlord insurance does not cover the contents of the tenant's property. Tenants have to have their own rental insurance. Many people don't realize that that is the law. The law is not going to be on your side in that situation. But unfortunately, even though the law was not on their side and they did lose, they still took him to court. That still took up a lot of time. And it also took up money because they had to pay for his own lawyer. So you want to think about what would happen if the weather changes. What would happen if the market changes? I've mentioned before that Staten Island, for example, used to be an oyster community. And then they turned into a strawberry community. These different types of shifts in the market can cause a shift as far as who you rent to and how much you can charge. You may also want to think about what would happen if costs increase, such as insurance and taxes. Are you going to try to figure out a way to maintain the area or remain in that area if insurance and taxes increases? Or are you going to then sell the property and go somewhere else that's a little bit more affordable? What about contaminated land? There are areas in the United States where they find a disproportionate number of women who live there have cancer. And a lot of times it is directly due to the fact that the land that those property is located on is contaminated. Are you going to stay, or are you going to try and solve the issue if you stay, or are you going to then turn around and sell? What if you're tired of the property? There are many retirees nowadays who don't feel like maintaining property, especially apartment buildings. And I'm speaking mainly to baby boomers who are 75 years old. Some of them are actually selling their properties at a discount. Their properties are actually very profitable, but at this point in the game, their issue is they just don't want to deal with this added stress of being a property owner, a landlord. What happens when tenants don't pay the rent? There are certain areas of the country that are not landlord friendly, and it may take you a good deal of time in order to get your rent. New York is notorious for that. There are people who wait 3 years in court because the courts are so backed up. And then many of the judges are liberal. And even though there's proof that the tenant is not a good tenant, sometimes because of the homeless situation and the overabundance and population of homeless in the city, they will give that person more time to stay in the apartment rent-free as opposed to letting them leave. Sometimes the property manager that you have does not fill out the paperwork right or doesn't give them the proper lease, and they'll end up in your property a lot longer than they were supposed to be. For example, the properties I had in Georgia, it normally takes 10 days to evict people. I was in a situation where it actually took 9 months. The county that I was in, most of the people are delayed when they pay rent for some particular reason. They're overcrowded. The courts are underserved. They don't have as many people running the court system as many of the large cities do. So it takes a lot longer to get rid of a tenant in those particular areas. You can also decide what to do when your tax abatement runs out. Many places around the country, they had what was called Obama Zone. Now it's called Opportunity Zone. It's located everywhere. across the country, different neighborhoods in different cities and suburbs have opportunity zones where they give you a 10-year tax abatement. Well, what if you buy property and in 10 years, what are you going to do with that property? Are you going to sell it or are you going to keep it? Transportation issues. The area in Georgia where I'm at, they used to have an airport bus. They stopped after a certain period of time of having that particular bus. See, many of the people in the neighborhood that I bought, they either work in the hospital, in the airport, in the police station, or in one of the doctor's offices. There are other businesses there as well, but those were the primary businesses in that area. Well, when transportation discontinued, there were a number of people who actually left that area and went somewhere else. Now they're talking about building a train station and having a train stop in that area. And they've also brought the airport bus back into the neighborhood. So now there are actually more people coming into the neighborhood to live. But what if you are in an area where they've taken away the transportation? You may want to think about, okay, if they take away the transportation, what is going to happen with our apartments? Are the people in our apartments, do they have their own car, their own means, or do they rely on public transportation? If they do rely on public transportation, they will leave your property. What about the school accreditation? The other issue that was faced in the area in Georgia was that the schools lost their accreditation. Once that happened, a whole lot of families moved out. Now they got it back and more families are moving back in. So you want to think about, okay, what happens? What am I going to do? What is the exit strategy going to be once the schools in the area lose their accreditation status? What about if there's illegal activity on your premises? Illegal activity can be extremely dangerous. First of all, it'll scare good tenants from renting from you, and the ones that you do have will leave. Second, I've mentioned where there was a drug dealer that was in one of the Myria members' properties. It was a 40-unit building, and he burned it to the ground because he was mixing chemicals together. What are you going to do? Are you going to wait until the house blows up and burns down? Or are you going to get rid of that particular troublesome tenant? Or are you going to sell the property? It's entirely up to you, but it's something that you want to think about. What about the neighbors? See, a lot of times you don't find out what kind of neighbor you have until after you close, especially if it's a new development. Sometimes you can't always tell. Pests. What are you going to do when pests invade your property? Sinkholes, cesspools develop. What are you going to do? Are you going to maintain it, fix it, and make sure it doesn't happen again? Or are you going to sell it? Water contamination. What are you going to do? Or what will you do if a business that you do not care for, such as a gas station or an adult entertainment center, cemetery, factory moves next door to your property. These businesses may lower the value of your property. So you may want to think about, okay, am I going to protest? Am I going to go and speak to my government officials and let them know that as a taxpayer and a property owner that I do not want this particular business lowering the value of the property? Or are you going to just sell? See, these are all exit strategies. Reasons why you can keep, maintain, sell. It's totally up to you. But these are things that can definitely happen and have already happened to myself and people that I know that you may want to think about. And yes, even, you're going to say this is crazy, haunted. Now, there are some buyers that love haunted houses, and then there are some that don't want to be bothered. What are you going to do in case that type of activity is found on your property? So, folks, I know I've given you a lot to think about tonight. Hopefully, the information will inspire you to reboot your mind, reset your focus, and make smart financial moves. Feel free to pass it along. Remember, each one, reach one, teach one. Bye for now. Until next time, have a good night.